folks a few minutes to find us. About 10 more seconds and then we'll go. Okay. 2 John. We're going to just read the first 3 verses and then the final verse. The final verse is very short, just to kind of tie it in with the authorship and intended recipient, original recipient of the letter. So, 2 John, verse 1. The elder to the chosen lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, for the sake of the truth which abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Son of the Father in truth and love. And then the letter closes. The children of your chosen sister greet you. Okay. What do we think about those, the opening and closing of this short letter?
Do we know who the elect lady is?
Well, it was election night last night. Did any ladies get elected? Or? It's always elections year. I mean, that's the thing. Get tired of all the campaigns. But what were you saying, Ed?
Well, there was a lady elected last night.
Okay. Somewhere. Oh. Well, does the closing verse give us a kind of an insight on that? The children of your chosen sister greet you. If you have the handout, you know, and you're being polite, letting other people kind of sort through. It is probably, most likely, a reference to a congregation, a specific congregation. And the congregation would be reflected or referred to in a feminine form. Hello, Robin. Good to see you here. And glad you got your hubby around a little more often these days. So we hope you're glad that you have your hubby around a little more often these days. But it's a different issue. We're glad for you. That's all I can say. So the congregations, hopefully, theoretically, these are 2 different congregations. John is writing this. The elder, we don't know for sure that is John, but it is likely John, and there's no real reason to think it isn't John. That's the traditional description, but it does not say, he doesn't put his name on it. So John is, we think, writing from one congregation with people there kind of involved in his ministry, knowing what's going on, maybe what he's writing to. They're aware, have some level of awareness of what he's writing to this other specific congregation, this other chosen lady. The church being presented frequently in kind of context as in the New Testament, this visual of the bride of Christ, a feminine ascription to the spiritual partners of the father. It goes back to the Old Testament where Israel is the spiritual bride of God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yet, many times when that is invoked in the Old Testament, it's not invoked favorably. They're not the nice, chaste, housekeeping, pleasing wife to God. They are the trifling bride of God. So normally we think of good things involving being married to a woman for men, but sometimes it is not so good. And this, though, being a chosen lady receiving the letter from John, who is with her chosen sister, it's hopeful that these contexts, that the brides are not just, the women are not just brides, but they're faithful, good, honoring brides to their spiritual spouse, Jesus. And there's no reason to think that the congregations as a whole that John is writing to don't have that. Now, before we get into some of the other letter, Nell is here. Hello, Nell. I don't know what that other comment means there, Nell. You can clarify, or we'll just pretend it's not there, whichever you choose to do. So, getting back to this idea of the church being presented in a feminine context, how does that make you feel about yourself? I guess is what I would say. What do you think about the church being presented in a feminine light?
Well, it's called the bride of Christ, and we see the godly teaching of what God and Christ and the apostles taught about what the husband should be like. So that should be a good situation, a good thing.
In what ways is it good?
The Lord is the head of the church. So we have his direction.
Okay, we have, again, this is looking at the place, I guess you would say, of women then, and maybe it would depend on who you ask today, if it's better or worse now than it was then. But the normal understanding of a marriage in that context, where the male figure in the marriage is very much the head of the house, and the Lord, Jesus being the head or the groomsman, the bridegroom, I should have said, of the church, would be the one providing the direction, would be the one leading, and the bride, spouse of the Lord, would be the one following.
Well, tonight's not the night, but anyway, what I was thinking more was that the husband is supposed to be loving and caring of the wife and looking out in her best interest. And so if we are the bride of Christ, then we should feel that way about his leadership.
Okay, so that not only are we being led by the groom, we are loved and cherished and cared for and nurtured by the groom. Kind of this aspirational, view of marriage that does come to fruition. Certainly, it's not unheard of whatsoever. It's not everybody's experience in marriage, but it is one that people who enter into marriage a lot of times hope for today. So there's that. We're hopeful in a good, healthy, traditional understanding of marriage. Yes, sir.
Also, the rest of that first part of the sentence there, where it says, elect the lady and her children, goes right along with Jesus' admonition to be on her shoulder. So I get the feeling here that this, you say support, how would I find it, that it fits very well the teaching of obedience also, that becomes little children. And how are little children, well, they're led, they're given certain things, well, Jesus is giving us his life. So I guess I see this as a positive in that sense, that it continues to flow. What Jesus started, is continued here also.
Okay, the relationship of the bride of the church to her groom is producing offspring, thinking new Christians coming along, and in a kind of, again, a traditional marriage arrangement, particularly in this context where John is writing, childcare is going to be pretty much exclusively the parameter of the mother, of the lady. The lady will be taking care of the children. So, we kind of think about our faith in these days and in these days and ages being very personalized and very individualized. I walk with the Lord, and when you sing the song, I walk with the King, and it's true, and I'm not trying to take that away, but there's also this imagery of the bride and the groom producing offspring that the church, the bride, cares for primarily. And so it's a family unit, a collective experience, and hopefully a blessed one, the one where the children are blessing their mother and their father. So it's a very powerful on that limit as we kind of think about maybe the marriages we have or had or wanted or saw our parents have. This is all very powerful imagery in that regard. And, there's a lot of different marriages, arrangements these days, and I'm not getting into all of that. But this, I think, John, it's to understand what John is saying, it is helpful to kind of take the favorable view of a traditional marriage into context as to what's going on here, rather than try to grind some axes about how this doesn't always work, and fathers are sometimes abusive, and mothers are too sometimes, and the dysfunction of family, and those are all issues that are important to people, and I'm not trying to dismiss them at all, but just like thinking of ourselves as maybe the sheep being led by Jesus, thinking of ourselves as Jesus being our teacher, our master, while we are the student or the follower, thinking about all of these different incarnations, I guess you will, these visualizations of our relationship with God are all valid. There's these other, they don't exclude another one. And but kind of what I'm, I guess, trying to get at tonight is this idea of the church being made up both of men and women being ascribed the feminine role in its relationship with Christ. And again, in the traditional sense, particularly in the time John is writing, particularly in the time this letter was written, whoever wrote it, in taking on that feminine sense, they are being led. They're not leading. They're with the children. They're viewed almost like a child. They don't really have that status and of a fully formed, I guess you would say, and fully competent adult within the culture. Now, I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I think that was never God's intention, but that is the way marital relationships had evolved up to that point. And by kind of putting us in that category, it is, in a sense, a compliment and a call, but it's also a challenge. It's a challenge to accept leadership. It's a challenge to accept a slightly inferior role in the relationship. And the ladies right now are wanting to get their gun out and show me who's inferior. And hopefully we have now embodied in our marriages more of what God wanted, I think, all along, which is a mutually honoring and mutually blessing relationship. But in the context in which John's writing it, this is kind of, I think, a subtext to what's going on, that we're following, and we are if we're following, we're being led. We are not empowered fully to make our own way in the world. And that's a challenging notion for us today, I think, especially for men in America who feel like I can do whatever I want. I'll be whatever my talents and hard work make of me. I'll get as far as I can go because that's God's plan for me, is to be independent and empowered and decisive and me be a leader. And in this context, John is saying the church as the bride, as a chosen lady and her children. So in this context, a bride is under something else, is under a guidance and does not have all of the options of life before her. Cannot look at the world and say, I can do whatever I want. I can make my own way, however I want to make it. And that level of self-determination wasn't really even available to the men back then, but at least not many of them. But it has this level of passivity, of inferiority, of subservience that we resist in our notion, not just in how we see ourselves in the world today, but in how we raise our children and how we want people to live, period. There was a book, I use this example sometimes, several years ago, there was a book called The Book of American Virtues, written by a compulsive gambler. So I guess that's one of our virtues, is gambling. I'm not sure, but if you look at those virtues, and I haven't, I don't know if I've ever looked at all of them, and I know I haven't looked at them recently. I do not believe submission is one of the American virtues. That's not something we extol as a virtue, being submissive. And maybe we admire it in other people, but we sure don't want it in ourselves. And yet that's the church's role, is always to be in submission to Christ, to bring honor and glory to Christ in this not just biblical, but ancient understanding of the relationship between a wife and a husband. That the husband is honored at the gates because of his virtuous wife, that her children rise and bless her in the morning, that strangers can come from afar and be blessed by her. The virtuous wife of Proverbs. To me, that's God's intention for marriage. A woman that is a very active and honored part of society as a whole, and is honored and honors and brings honor. But for us to fulfill that role in our mission in the world today as then, it is to be in submission to our groom, to our husband, our spiritual husband, which is Jesus Christ. And that's something that as men, I think we have to, maybe that's why when this is not, we're not a great example of this, but a lot of times you go to small congregations and it's about 80% women. And we have some wonderful, faithful ladies here. We've lost a few this year, but we've had, still a pretty good population of not just married men, but bachelors who work within the congregation, who are a very vital part of the congregation. But we've lost 2 this year, and that really hurt. We've got one good one here tonight. So, and there is a place for the married and the unmarried individual within the church. And within the church, they're all married to Christ spiritually. So maybe I've already made a little too much of that point, but it is, I think, a challenge and a check from time to time. We do, as the congregation, a small congregation, but we have elders and deacons and me, and we're trying to find the best way forward, and we're making decisions and using the wisdom that we have. But all of that should be in submission, even from the leaders of the congregation, should be in submission to our spiritual groom, which is Jesus Christ. Hello, Kim. Good to see you. Good to know you're here, I guess I should say. So that's the context of the letter. John is with another congregation, another chosen, honored lady with her children, writing to another congregation. He's with one, writing to another. And again, we think it's John. May not be. Okay, verses 4-6. I think I belabored that point adequately. I was very glad to find some of your children walking in truth. Yes, sir. Oh.
You left something sort of up in the air. The bride of Christ is the church. And I think of that as universal. And so that when are we the bride of Christ and when are we the children? That sort of gets muddy in there.
Yeah, I think, and we're going to kind of, as we go through this, see, in family, a lot of times lines get blurred, don't they?
But the way I sort of looked at it in my own mind to try to make some semblance of order about it, collectively, we're the bride of Christ. Individually, then we would be the children. It's sort of the way I was looking at it, because otherwise it puts these children out someplace where they should, where they don't have the same blessing.
Well, I think that's a good way of delineating it, of kind of applying it in a practical sense, of coming down to how families practically work. I don't know that John, I probably have gone too far with what John is saying anyway, but I think, as children, they are the offspring of this church being faithful is producing children, is producing new Christians by holding on to the truth, a truth for which he loves them. I love you in the truth. And he's going to get into some of the children here in verse 4. I think what you're saying is more than fair. I think it's a good way to understand it. I think also, though, our tendency is to have to draw these bright lines in understanding a text that's very difficult to understand at times, written a long time ago in a very vague language. At the same time, in kind of a family context, we know that lines get blurred sometimes, sometimes inappropriately. But for the most part, what I'm saying is whatever the traditional roles of husband and wife are, sometimes the husband does something that might traditionally be the wife's role, and the wife does something the husband might normally do.
But we're all children of God, so that was why I go with the idea of individually we're the children, and then as a collective being, we're the bride of Christ.
Okay. I think that's a more than fair.
Because otherwise you're in conflict with, why are you calling me a bride at one time and then a child at another?
Well, they used to have child brides. It's been outlawed. But it's, and in this context, you would have had child brides. You would have had betrothals to very young women would have been engaged or whatever, maybe even married. But I don't think there's any real. I don't have anything where I disagree with it, other than I would say that maybe, and maybe I've done it too much, taking it too kind of literally, when it's a figurative image. This idea that as a congregation, as a church, we are, and we think about the church. There's one church, right? And yet, this is a bride of Christ from another bride of Christ. There's one church, but to the churches of Asia, there's to the church that meets at this house, and so there are these different gatherings, congregations, if you want to call them. In a sense, they were also a bride, a body, an incarnation of Christ in their community.
Well, collectively, they're the bride of Christ.
Collectively, all the congregations add up to be the bride.
Yeah.
Collectively, the members of a congregation, so it's a warm sentiment. I think John is speaking very affectionately, both of the congregation he's writing from and the congregation he's writing to. And that hopefully, in marriage, we have that warmth and affection and care for one another. And the children are blessed by that and are produced by that.
It's kind of, I don't know, it sounds to me like he is addressing this group of people who he's been very close with, and he is reminding them of their commonality of things that they have love, they know the truth. And it's kind of like being a letter like this, it's kind of getting everybody kind of on the same page, because he's going to go into something where he has something that he wants to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we all know where we have been. And then as he gets into the next portion, he's not trying to divide. He's trying to pull them together as far as truth and love, because his next statement is going to be about some dangers that there is if your love gets out of line and it draws you away from truth.
Mm-hmm. I guess in this, I'm glad you brought this up, and I guess this is kind of what I'm trying to express in regards to Thelma's comments, which I don't disagree with at all. We can kind of sometimes in our experience feel like if we go to a congregation, we feel like maybe this congregation is a defender of the truth. This congregation is solid with its doctrine and practices. This is a sound congregation. And walk out of there feeling like nobody there cares if I come or go. And then we might go into a congregation, we think these people are all over the place. They're crazy, but they love me. And I heard someone talking about their home congregation, their home church. They walked in and She said, as soon as I walked in, I felt like I was at home. Now, how are you going to argue with that person and say, no, you're not. You're not really at home. So the idea of truth and love in our minds and thoughts are not absolutely joined at the hip all the time. They can exist separately. But for John here, they exist together in this congregation. I love you in truth. So there's love with truth for the bride and her children. So I guess that's what I'm saying. We want to compartmentalize everything, and in a way that maybe the ancients didn't, and that it was just a more kind of, it's just like our typical homes now. The husband and wife sleep in one bed, and the kids are in their own rooms or sharing a room or whatever, but they're in a different room. Whereas Jesus talks about God being this father that sleeps with his children, right? He's down there on the floor on the mat. He's got his kids all gathered around him sleeping, and someone's knocking on the door late at night. My friend just showed up. I don't have anything to give him. I don't have anything to feed him. And the father's like, well, if I get up, I got to wake all my kids up to get you whatever you have. But if you keep knocking, he'll disturb even his children to take care of his friend. So the lines, I think, are just, maybe not blurry, but it's not like you can't be a child and a bride. And it's not like you can't have the truth and love. In fact, you're supposed to be both in both cases. You're supposed to have both. Because we're not talking about the bride that, what happens on the wedding night. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about living a life together, bringing honor and glory together, building life, bringing life into the world, and creating life together. So, it's not literal, which would be weird, to think about it that way. But these things kind of go together. Love and truth, lady, children, it's all coexists harmoniously through the love of the Father, the love of Christ, the working of the Spirit, the love of the Spirit. Verses 4-6, I was very glad to find some of your children walking in truth, just as we have received commandment to do from the Father. Now I ask you, lady, not as though I were writing to you a new commandment, but the one which we have from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, that you should walk in it. Okay, what do you think about that? We had to at least get through verse 6. We had to.
Well, his commandments are not grievous, but his commandments do point us in the right direction of both the love and the ability to do the things that we know we should do, that the commandments do. So it's the knowledge and it's the love. So in this sense, I don't think you can separate the two. You can always separate them, but in this case, I believe he's really bringing these two together very strong. But if you have for instance, and that's why that's why I observe about the idea of children. I've been thinking a lot about that tonight. That children depend upon you for what? For everything they have, right? For their safety.
Sometimes for their whole lives too, huh?
Without the thing. So that's how we depend upon God. So in that sense, we are the children of God. We depend upon him for everything. He gave us Jesus. He gave us our life. So on and on and on, this idea of children, to me, is really a very strong thing that I think, as you say, in this country, I think we tend to lose sight of that because of this society that has developed about different types of marriages and so forth and so on. Now, And I'm thinking also of, I don't like to bring this up in a way, but in a way, it's true, that racial problems. You watch kids, black and white, play together, it's not a problem. You get an adult in there and you got a problem. So, I mean,
Well-
it shows that becoming as children in our thoughts and our deeds it's a strong thing, it's not a.
It is, and we have, again, in our culture, this ideal, I guess, of children reaching an age, usually it's 18 or 21 or something like that, and they are ready to go out of the nest, never to return. And whether that's a good image or not an image, I think the good image, the image of the Bible for us as children is not for that we become independent of God, that we reach a certain level of spiritual maturity and we don't need God anymore. Spiritual maturity is in fact seen in growing dependence upon God, growing trust in God. We are always, unless you are like a little child. So these children that are walking in the truth are still little children, no matter how old they are, in God's eyes. And your kids are probably always still your little kids. Thelma's still trying to get PD raised. She's working on it. He's not too big to whip, Thelma. So you just remind him of that.
I don't want to jump ahead a lot, but the final verse, verse 13, the children of your message.
Mm-hmm. Again, yeah.
So it puts it back down. So he starts, with kind of the children. So he kind of he places himself, to me, he places himself in that group. He acknowledges that.
So there's this idea of obedience and love, because that's the commandment. The commandment that you are obeying is love. And again, a lot of times we'll draw a line. I can keep the law, but not love. And we talked, 1 Corinthians 13. Whatever you do, if you do it without love, at least you're just annoying people and not doing any good. You may actually really be doing a lot of harm. But the commandment is love, so you can't keep the commandment in a sense without loving. And some of the, and then there's other commandments too, that the love is expressed. The commandment is to love, and so the obedience to the commandment is seen in love, but that love is to keep the commandments, plural. That's how you show your love for God, is that you are his obedient little child. And we don't, kids today, I don't think are ever taught to obey, are they? I mean, it's just.
He is the truth. And he is the truth. And without the truth, there can't be love. So unless you're truthful to your children, you can't be loving.
At least not over the long haul. And when John, if he has a rebuke for this congregation, I find some of your children walking in truth. He doesn't say, I find some of your children lacking in love. Maybe they still have love for one another and love for at least the idea of God, or love for the idea of Christ, but they do not have, and we'll see that now next week, this idea of the incarnation, a correct understanding of the teaching they have received about Jesus coming in flesh. They can have love without truth, maybe for a time, but when you don't have the truth for very long, ultimately, the love will go away too. If you don't understand and accept truth, if you feel like you're being lied to, it's really hard to love through that, isn't it? Maybe you can for a while. So some are walking in truth, which is obeying commandments, which include loving and is expressed in keeping other commandments. And then some are not. If some are walking in truth, some are not. And yet they're all children of this lady. And I think we'll kind of close on this, I guess. This idea that you're going to get the congregation, anybody that thinks they're going to get a congregation set up with systems in place, with processes installed, and it will just go forward and do great there afterwards. They have missed everything. I mean, is that how you raise kids? Is that how you have a marriage? You got human beings on all sides, and they're not machines. And even in the machine world, they break down all the time, don't they? They need care and attention and maintenance too. So, it is the best way I've ever heard it described by one of the elders that we had in Aberdeen is the church is not an organization, it is an organism. And as a living, breathing thing, it needs nurture, it needs care. The congregation, the members individually, yes, but the congregation needs this too. And so, there's objective standards that need to be, if not met, considered. Just like when you go to the doctor, he's got, height, weight, blood pressure, a lot of other things, or she, I should say, my doctors are all women. So but when you go to the doctor, she's got these kind of objective goals for you, things she's looking for. But there's also this is who I have coming in to see me right now. Whatever that the standard is, I'm not treating that person, I'm treating this person. How do I help the person grow maybe towards that standard or deal with the fact they're never going to get there at this point? How can I give them the best quality of life going forward? So in a congregational sense, there's things we'd love to see on an objective basis, but subjectively, these are the people we have. For a while tonight, we're going to have 3 of us here. We're glad some more showed up for us this evening. But if that was it, where the 2 or 3 are gathered. So Jesus loves the body of of Christ, the body of the church, which is a living thing. And it is several, multiple living things, and it's made up of even more living things that obey and love, and then when the obedience goes, when the truth goes, then I think eventually the love will go too. But maybe it can last for a little while until maybe you get them back to the truth at some point. I don't know. Okay. Very good thoughts. Very good discussion tonight. And we'll we'll hopefully finish up with 2 John next week, pick up in verse 7. So at this time,